Hi everybody, this is Bruce Peeples with my video blog, Wake Up America. Today I want to talk about the need for all of us to stand up and defend the greatest government in the world against the endless onslaught of government bashing that goes on non-stop with no one seemingly willing to defend the greatest government in the history of the world. The federal government of the United States has done more things for more people than any institution in the history of mankind. The federal government of the United States has freed millions of people from tyranny and poverty. The federal government of the United States has given rights to more people than any government anywhere has ever given to anyone. And yet what we hear constantly, especially on the right, is this endless bashing of our government, our federal government, America's government. It's the longest running democracy in the history of the world. And it's worked. And it's done more good for more people, like I said, than any institution you can imagine. I would stack it up against any religious institution. I would stack it up against any government institution. When you really look at the record, the federal government of the United States has been a shining example of what can happen when government for the people and by the people actually happens. And yet, like I say, we constantly hear that the government is evil, ineffective, that it's bad, that at the core there's a group of people who are trying to hurt everybody and destroy everything. And no one defends it. I mean, you look at movies in Hollywood and there's always some nefarious CIA agent who's trying to kill everybody and destroy everything. That's not reality. For some reason and somehow we've developed a mindset that the federal government, our government, the best government in the world, is bad. And these politicians capitalize on it by constantly bashing it, by constantly smashing it, by constantly lying about it. Let's get the record straight. Before 1930, the federal government did nothing. That was the philosophy. And as a result, we had a society with a few rich and very rich people, and everybody else was pretty much dirt poor. There was no middle class. This is when there was no government. This is the kind of government that these small government, small tax, Tea Party types want. A federal government that does nothing. And what was the result? Like I said, everybody was poor except a few rich people. And that's where we're heading now. That's what having a weak federal government does. Basically, before the 1930s, we had children working in mines for 18 hours a day for pennies. We had grown men working in mines for 18 hours a day for nothing. We had men and women working in sweatshops for virtual pennies. We had mines and factories that were so horribly unsafe that regularly we had mine disasters that killed thousands and factory fires that killed thousands more. Okay? It wasn't until the federal government started instituting safety regulations. It wasn't until they started minimum wage laws and child labor laws that all this stopped. Okay? And even then, the rights of many didn't exist. Women weren't allowed to vote. Minorities had no say and weren't allowed to vote. When the federal government is weak, what happens is the states take over. And if you have a vast majority in any given state, they can pass all kinds of laws that take away the rights of everyone. Look at Jim Crow in the South. Yeah, The federal government ended slavery and then acceded the government to the states. And what happened was they created a virtual apartheid, okay, that kept everybody separate. Separate toilets, separate transportation and restaurant facilities, separate housing facilities. In reality, they created a, if you want to see what happens when the federal government doesn't enforce federal laws, look at a movie like The Help, or one of those movies where you see how things actually work. Our federal government is a great thing. Our federal government has done all kinds of amazing things. Our federal government defeated Hitler. Our federal government defeated Tojo. Our federal government defeated communism. Our federal government has given freedom to many. Our federal government has given freedom to people in the Middle East that didn't have it. Now all of this is coming at a great cost, which we've all borne with dignity, with nobility. The federal government isn't perfect, and sometimes it gets involved in wars that it shouldn't get involved in, and policies that it shouldn't enact. But by and large, it's the greatest government that ever was and ever will be. And if I have to hear one more Republican or anyone talk about how this great institution is bad, I'm going to start calling those people un-American. Because that's what they are. What they're doing is bashing our government. They're bashing the government that we created, the officials we voted for, the policies we wanted. And what they want is no government. So they can do what they want. So they can pollute, discriminate, and do all the kinds of things that they feel they should do. Exploit, manipulate financial markets, steal from the elderly and the poor. These are the kinds of things that people who want no government really are after. What we have to realize is we have to stand up, and every time someone says that the federal government is bad, we got to call them on it. Somebody's got to stand up and say, you're wrong. This is the greatest government in the history of the world. This is the government that's done more for more people than any other institution. This is the government that basically stands up for the little guy and the middle guy and even the big guy. It's time we realize that bashing the federal government is getting us nowhere. Being a hater of the federal government is getting us nowhere. Okay? What we need is we need to realize what a great government we have. Sure, it's not perfect, but we need to vote for people who are going to use this powerful federal government to do the kinds of things that empower people like they did in the past, during the greatest generation, when not only did they defeat the Great Depression by using the federal government, not only did they defeat Hitler by using the federal government, not only did they defeat Tojo Japan and Mussolini by using the federal government, but then, after it was all over, the federal government of the United States rebuilt both Europe and Japan and created allies that we have to this day. It gets to the point that those who argue that the federal government shouldn't do anything are just plain stupid. Okay? Somehow we've allowed ourselves to be lured into this idea that small government and less taxes is a good thing. It isn't. It's a bad thing. And when we did just the opposite, when we had big government that had big projects like the interstate highway system and the space program, when we did those things, okay, that's when America thrived. Okay? Big government is not the problem. Big government is the answer. And all these people who have been lured into this hypnotic lure of small government need to wake up. It's big government that works. It's a strong federal government that we need. We need a government that stands up for the rights of the people wherever they may be. In the South, whether they're poor, whether they're women. That's what the federal government can do. For years, the federal government didn't enforce civil rights laws. For about 100 years, they didn't enforce civil rights laws. But once the federal government did, it empowered people that had been without justice and fairness for a century. People who say that the federal government of the United States is bad are fools. People who say that the federal government of the United States is evil are ignorant. It's the greatest institution in the history of the world, and like I said before, it's done more good for more people than any other institution ever. Please, wherever you are, when you hear these negatrons, when you hear these GUV-A-PHOBES and these pedophobes talking their crap about the federal government, it's time we stop sitting there and listening to it and start standing up and defending the greatest government on earth. In my mind, these people who bash this government are un-American, and it's time we call them on it. It's time we see them for what they really are. Haters. People who want no one to catch an even break. The federal government of the United States is the best thing there is. We can make it better. We can make it stronger. We can go back to a government that had projects that made things happen, like the interstate highway system and the space program and the Hoover Dam. And I could go on about how the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Arizona Water Project, all these things the federal government did to empower Americans with electricity and water. And we need to go back to a government that is not only willing to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States that we have, but it has to start building the infrastructure of the future. Big government is good. The federal government is good. It's time we stand up to the haters and the bashers and take this country back. Thanks. This is Bruce Peeples. I'm going to do this a couple times a week. It's called Wake Up America. I want people to start thinking about what really is the truth and stop listening to the propaganda that has lured us into this inaction, into this sleep for the last 30 years. Again, this is Wake Up America, Bruce Peeples. Thank you.